Welcome back. On to other news now. Mozambican President Filipe Nyusi says troops fighting militants in its northern Cabo Delgado province were gaining ground and the enemy was retreating. Nyusi was addressing the nation on the crisis that was triggered in March when the insurgents attacked the coastal town of Palma near natural gas projects. Nyusi says the insurgency has caused total paralysis in mineral activity, agriculture and infrastructure development in the region.
Mozambique will coordinate the Southern Africa Development Community against the terrorist groups operating in the northern Mozambique province of Cabo Delgado. That's according to the Chief of Staff of the Mozambican Armed Forces, Joaquim Magrace. South Africa will lead the troops with Botswana assisting. Magrace said Mozambique will provide the general staff for the entire anti-terrorist operation. 9 Mozambican officers have been chosen to be in all positions of coordination, although each SADC country will command its own forces, with South Africa as the country with the largest force in overall control. Meanwhile, Rwandan forces deployed to help contain an insurgency have killed at least 30 militants. Security officials say the troops were patrolling a forest near the northern port town of Palma when they encountered the militants. About 1,000 Rwandan soldiers were sent to Mozambique earlier this month. About 8,000 people have been displaced by the 4-year insurgency. Thousands of people have been killed.
For more on the Mozambique conflict, we're now joined via Zoom by David Otto, the counter-terrorism expert. Mr. Otto, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to the Globe. First of all, what do you make of the announcement that the Mozambican troops are now gaining ground in Cabo Delgado?
That's a very positive announcement, especially the fact that Cabo Delgado, the district of Mueda, Palma, Muidimbe, these were areas which were prior to now, they were somehow under control of the so-called Al-Shabaab, ISIS-linked jihadists. Now, I think it's a positive news that we've had now African countries, especially countries like Rwanda, more importantly, SADC forces, South African forces, been preparing to be deployed to this region. But I think the most important thing is that the presence of Rwandan forces is now making some positive news. As I understand, some of the areas in Mueda, some villages in Mueda, Palma and Muidimbe have now been retaken from the jihadists, and they are now being secured by both Mozambican forces and Rwandan forces working side by side.
Who could possibly be credited for this positive development? Is it perhaps the foreign intervention of foreign forces such as the Rwandan forces and the SADC forces as well?
I think credit has to go to each and every one of the forces that are there. Remember, this is a counter-insurgency operation. The Rwandan forces are foreign to this territory, and it's only by coordinating with the presence of the Mozambican forces who are actually leading the front, that is when any of them can actually have any success. So it's a team spirit that is now on ground. I mean, without the Rwandan forces, of course, this could have been a lot more difficult for the Mozambican forces. But without the coordination of the Mozambican forces, then the Rwandan troops will be sitting ducks. They don't know the location. They have to follow the lead of the Mozambican forces. And this is how it is going to work, even when SADC deploys its forces from South Africa, Tanzania, and other contributing states. It will have to be led by the Mozambican forces because they know the terrain, they know which areas are more critical. So it's the team spirit. You know, there is no one who can take any or all of the credit.
So the tension between Mozambique and SADC and the deployment of the Rwandan troops in the theatre of battle, did it play a part in the change of attitude, in particular from South Africa? Because we understand that there's also been tension between South Africa and Mozambique.
I think one of the things we've always talked about is to try as much as possible, especially when it comes to the peace and stability of African countries, in the case of Mozambique, to leave politics out of security issues. Now, I think SADC is quite unhappy that Rwandan forces, well, we have to be clear, 700 soldiers and about 300 police officers, not 1,000 soldiers. So I think what the SADC is saying, which is somehow plausible, is that they should have been told that Rwandan forces are being deployed to this region. And the second argument is that SADC should have had priority. But I think it's not about who comes first. And I also think it's not about who is the bigger boy in the field. I think what is more important, as we've seen in the bilateral agreement that Rwanda signed with Mozambique, is that action takes place and the jihadist capacity on ground is reduced. Now, this should be an advantage for the SADC forces, including South African forces, when they do arrive, because I'm sure that with the experience of Rwanda in UN missions, of course, one has to be very clear. This is a different ballgame. This is fighting insurgency. It's not peacekeeping or peace missions. But I think the presence of Rwandan forces working alongside Mozambican forces will give the arriving SADC forces a soft landing ground. And, working in collaboration should be an advantage for all of them, in my opinion.
Mr. Otto, we may not be necessarily privy to the jihadist modus operandi in its operation in Cabo Delgado. So what's the possibility of a potential fight back now that the military forces have gained ground against them?
I think what should be very certain, especially for contributing forces, is that they should expect casualties. South African forces do not have the kind of experience fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda type of jihadist. They don't have that experience. The Rwandan forces, too, don't have that kind of experience. So, these countries should expect casualties, to happen. But this is normal when it comes to war. But I think, what is going to happen now, there are sources who say the jihadists are about 3,000 in number. This could be overestimated. Because they don't have any official registration of fighters. But again, in counterinsurgency, it's always good to overestimate your enemy than underestimate them. Now, what I think is going to happen is that we would see an increase, perhaps, in attacks carried out by these jihadist groups, perhaps not just in Mozambique, but then beginning to extend, some of the attacks to these troop contributing countries. So one has to be very careful how you deploy your troops. Now, this is not to say that Rwandan forces or South African forces shouldn't help Mozambique, but they should be aware that the modus operandi of ISIS, linked factions, is that as soon as you deploy your forces to fight them in one location, they too will find a way to establish units in your country, to fight you in your own backyard. So this should be an expectation, but it shouldn't be a deterrent to the contributing countries.
And taking into cognizance that this is the first time that the Rwandan and the SADC forces are thrown into an ISIS-linked jihadist battle of this nature, what's your level of understanding of how well they've adapted to this?
I think the first thing is, they will learn by experience, like every other country does learn by experience. Counterinsurgency is not a war that you read in the books, or you simply just have the experience by in theory. You've got to learn it in practice. Now, the way that you do this, in helping the forces to settle in that kind of an environment which is very unpredictable, is to carry out a very effective force deployment training. People have to know what to expect. They have to understand the modus operandi of the jihadists, how they carry out their massacres. The forces have to be prepared, not just physically, but psychologically as well. They've got to be able to, understand this. Now, the key about this is how much they work alongside the ground forces that are there, the Mozambican forces, and how much they can win the hearts and minds of the local population. This is very important. If they lose this, if they lose their coordination with the Mozambican forces, if they cannot win the hearts and minds of the local population, this is going to be tragedy. But, I hope that with the experience of Rwanda, but also South Africa in certain types of war, not this kind, they will be able to adapt. But, trust me, they will suffer casualties. But this is the nature of counterinsurgency.
No doubt the local population obviously needs to have an input insofar as, fighting this battle against these insurgents. So, and in terms of the cooperation between the local Mozambican forces and the foreign forces, have you seen a coordination between those forces?
Yes, I mean, I've spoken to, some people on ground, and one of the things that they've established is that there is a fine coordination that is happening between the Mozambican forces and some of the foreign forces, especially Rwandan forces that are already on ground. I know that there are SADC advanced forces that are there to, provide a soft landing, but, it has to be told that they are not yet involved in any, battles yet. So there is that coordination that is already, being worked out between these countries, and I can see that there's going to be some progress. People are going to try and adapt to the local population. They've got to be able to interact with the people, win their hearts and minds, and try as much as possible to ensure that there is coordination of operations. Now, one thing which is very clear in terms of counterinsurgency, it's that it is a people-centric activity. The people are the ones who give intelligence. They are responsible by duty to give information, but only if they can be seen to have that protection from the local forces. So as long as the local population is happy, as long as they can feel that there is some level of protection, they can visibly see that they are being protected from these jihadis, they will comply. They would give information, and this is one of the things that no terrorist organizations want. They do not want the local population to be cozy, to use that word, with the military forces. They will try and fight that, but it is the duty of these officers who have been deployed to make sure that they can win the hearts and minds of the local population. That's the only way you can win them. The terrorists, to be precise.
Mr. David Otto, counter-terrorism expert, joining us via Zoom. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.